Good morning. I'm Ken Biberaj, and welcome to Coffee with Ken, a thought leadership series at the nexus of business and politics. In the news today, Donald Trump has won the Iowa caucus, and he is in New Hampshire. China's population shrank for the second year in a row. And today's topic is strategies from the wealthy, powerful, and wise. And we are joined by Chris Ullman, president of Ullman Communications. Chris, so great to see you.
Ken, thank you for having me. I'm really excited.
Well, look, I love the book. Incredible. And I think it's one of these things where you kind of see books like this and you expect to kind of get like the advice and the guidance. And this was just for me such a page turner, and it was so insightful. And it was a lot of nuggets that I didn't think or expect I would kind of get. And it was funny because one of the parts that I loved most, which I think could only be expressed by you, was this kind of notion of gratitude and how so many of the billionaires and folks you've interacted with were just had this approach of just gratitude and gratefulness. And I'd love for you to kind of talk about the book through that lens first, because I don't think people who read books about billionaires expect there to be a lot of kind of commentary about gratitude, right? Like, and that just struck me, and it was only you could, I think, kind of frame this. So congrats on the books, and let's start there maybe.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thanks again for having me. When people think about, how to be successful, they think about, being strategic and tactical and making sure they're in the right meetings and phrasing their emails and white papers in just a certain way. And that all counts. But there are key parts about being a success in life that deal with building bridges to people that are think differently than you and being grateful, like gratitude, generosity, and the like. So there are whole sections of this book that are very complementary to kind of the traditional things you think would be important when it comes to being a success. So gratitude is right at the top of the list. And you're right. You might think that, if someone's a billionaire or, they are the chairman of this or the president of that, and I've worked with them all, that they're like, it's all because of me. I'm so wonderful. And there's a great anecdote in the book about gratitude where Dan Daniello, who's a billionaire, who's one of the co-founders of the Carlyle Group alongside Bill Conway and David Rubenstein, in an interview with a reporter one time, he was talking about his very humble beginnings, a single mother growing up in a rural community in Western Pennsylvania. And he did a lot of things in his life, and now he's a billionaire. And he said that he is so blessed that he levitates out of bed every day with gratitude. It's a great visual. He levitates out of bed with gratitude because he's so thankful for everything he has. And I only heard him say it once with an interview with a reporter, but it just whacked me over the head. And I said, wow, if he's that grateful, I better be grateful too.
That's so incredible. And I mean, staying on that grateful thread, me personally, I mean, I'm so grateful for our relationship, and I want to kind of folks to really understand how we met and connected. And it kind of goes back to the fall of 2020. And we started this series the first week out of the pandemic in March of 20. And it was just like this experiment where we thought we could get some people, have some conversations and so on. And I always had this grand ambition, like, wow, if I could get David Rubenstein to be on Coffee with Ken, that could be the next catalyst. And through a series of relationships, I was connected with you. And not only did you give me the time of day to even have this conversation about a thought leadership series that was run on Zoom by somebody who had never really had a track record for it, you actually listened, you heard us, and you actually gave me the opportunity to interview David Rubenstein. So I just want to kind of express my gratitude to you, because after having David on, anybody I called was just like, well, if David Rubenstein did it, then I guess this is a thing and we should do Coffee with Ken. So, first of all, thanks to you. And maybe take us back a little bit. Like, what made you say yes to this? I mean, when we had that first conversation.
Well, all I could say is you earned it. And I'm so happy that you are succeeding and you're getting great guests who are insightful and hopefully making your listeners smarter, happier, more thoughtful people, because they're exposed to these important people and their ideas and the like. So when you are the PR person for a bigwig, it could be the president of the United States, a billionaire like David, the chairman of the House Budget Committee, John Kasich, who I worked for, Arthur Levitt, the chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission. On one hand, you're a gatekeeper and trying to regulate who gets to talk to those bigwigs. but at the same time, you're listening closely to what does the boss need and want, and what will help them communicate their message to different audiences. So the factors that I look for, and this is just very practical stuff. So I look for, is it a credible platform? Is the person serious? Do they have the right type of audience? Are they asking questions that are meaningful and interesting and not just gotcha type questions? So I checked out some of your work, and in our conversations and our emails, I quickly realized you're a serious guy. You work at a serious organization, and you were approaching your conversations with people in a thoughtful way. And that's what I look for. And we were taking a bit of a flyer because you up to that point you didn't have a David Rubenstein type guest on, but because all of these factors were in place, the stars had aligned. I said, I think this makes sense. Ken is a smart guy. He's a thoughtful guy. Let's give it a shot. David loved his conversation with you. I'm sure he'll be back if you'll have him. And it's great to see where you've gone with it.
Amazing. Well, thank you again for that. And listen, as I kind of read your book, I just think it's one of these things that everyone should kind of pay attention to, because it struck me as it was kind of less about the storytelling and the gossip about these billionaires, and more about like those lessons and how they're applicable to just regular folks looking to improve their lives, their business, and their skill set. And I'd love to kind of hear your kind of message that resonated with me was really around like being the best you, right? And what do you want people to take away from this when they read it, right? I mean, it was really, for me, tangible, the kind of lessons that you wanted to communicate with folks.
Yeah. So when I was writing it, and I said, oh, it's all these lessons from these billionaires and other bigwigs I've worked for, people said, oh, it's a how to be a billionaire. And I said, no, it's not. I don't want to be a billionaire because that's not who I am. What I want to do is be my best. When I was growing up, my father used to say, he didn't compare me to other kids or people. He just said, are you doing your best? If I got a B in a class, he'd say, is that your best? And if I said no, he said, well, you need to work harder. And if I said, listen, I tried so hard and I still got a B, he'd say, fine. So what's interesting about this book is that there are 50 lessons that are I observed firsthand from
Yeah.
14 of some of the most successful people in the world, literally, and I'm not kidding about that. Like billionaires, CEOs, presidents, etc. So it's
Current
firsthand
governor of
observation.
Virginia, the current
Yeah,
governor of
Glenn
Virginia.
Youngkin, Mitch Daniels, John Kasich, three people who went on to be governor, four billionaires, and a parking attendant, and I hope we get to him.
We will, yeah.
And so by observing firsthand these people in action, I saw kind of the special sauce that enables them to be their best. And I said, well, if they can do X, why don't I try that and see if it will affect my life, the way I think and the way I behave. And it literally took me from the minor leagues to the major leagues in terms of how I function as a person. I really feel that I have fulfilled my father's goal for me, which was to be my best. Now, does that mean I've stopped? I'm stagnant? No, I'm always growing. I mean, I apply the lessons in this book to my life every single day. I'm 60 years old and I say, all right, I literally last week said, all right, I've got a problem and it's a real tricky problem. I need to turn to the book and say, what would David do in this situation? What would Bill Conway do? What would Adina Friedman do? And the solutions were there. And I said, aha. So there's merit in taking a step back and then surveying the different kind of skills and practices and see how they apply to your life. And they're all captured in this book.
Yeah, and I feel for people my age, your age, younger people, one of the lessons I loved most that I was almost validating was the section where you talk about being impatient and just getting stuff done. And I think both a little bit different, but just like talk about what you mean by being impatient, and then when you're talking about getting stuff done, like just how important is that, right? Like you don't necessarily need to be the smartest person or the PhD, but if you could actually successfully accomplish tasks reliably and get it done, just how important is that little, notion? I mean, yeah.
Oh my gosh. So when I do a lot of mentoring, and that's really where the book came from, is that I
Yeah,
meet with a
you can
lot of
tell.
college kids and I say, oh, let me tell you this lesson and how it will affect your life. So impatience is really an interesting and important kind of state of mind. it's all about getting stuff done because there are a lot of talkers, blah, 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 but they don't deliver. What I tell young people is if you can drive a process, if you can actually deliver on a strategy, wow, what a difference it will make in your career. So the way I learned this, and it's a really fun little anecdote. So I work for Arthur Levitt. So Arthur is this amazing public servant. He's 92 years old. He had an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal 6 weeks ago. The guy is a machine. He was chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission when I worked for him. And one day, and this is just emblematic of how he is every day, I'm chatting with him in his office, and he's just rattling through. I want to do this. 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 And I said, all right, all right. I'm taking notes. We're having a conversation. And then he paused and he says, so how's it going? And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, the first item on the list. I said, how could I be working on that when we're here talking? He said, better get going. And it's just such classic Arthur. He's like, go, 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 go. That doesn't mean he doesn't rest. He
Yeah.
does. But there's purpose there. There's
Yeah.
immediacy. I coined this phrase with my children, especially when they were younger, but it's applicable now that they're in their 20s, which is don't deny the world your wonderment. Now, that phrase is not in the book, but it probably should have been. And what it means is that I have gifts. Everyone does. And am I sharing them with people? If you have purpose, if you have immediacy, and you have impatience, then you will be eager to share your gifts with people.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And I feel like the Wonderman thing was maybe in your first book or something, because I remember hearing or reading
Yeah,
that. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Real quick, I mean, you strike me as like an interesting person to have been tapped to be the first global communications director for like a massive private equity company, right? Like, talk about that journey briefly and how you've maintained such a kind of warm, welcoming, kind of collaborative approach, right? Like, it doesn't seem like after your years in government and in private equity that you're coming out of this jaded, right? Like, you seem genuinely optimistic about public service and the private sector and what can be accomplished. I mean, how do you maintain that kind of even keel, positive attitude?
Well, I mean, at its core, my faith structure says love God, love your neighbor. And if you just say that over and over, love
Yeah.
God, love your neighbor, love God. I mean, things flow from that. Is that I rejoice. What does it mean to love your neighbor? It means that I want the best for you. I want the best for the barista or the bus driver or my colleague. I want the best for them. And therefore am I interacting with them in a way that I'm learning from them, I'm giving to them, I'm helping them become their best or not. So that's why I say at its core, because that's a state of mind. Now, when it comes to uh, like this notion of public service and the like, I think it's fundamentally important. And I've worked probably a third of my career in a public service in a
Mhm.
setting, White House, SEC, Capitol Hill, and we are a nation that requires people to step into the public sector at least some point in their career. I would hope, and then give back and be a part of the solution. And so I loved working in the government, but I love the private sector as well. And I love people, and I love giving back and learning from them. I've learned a lot from you. All the coffees we've had in actual coffee shops. I just you're someone I can learn from too. You have to view other humans as resources to learn from.
Yeah, and I think that's what you've taught me, and I think what readers take away from your book is kind of taking the blinders off, right? And this book wasn't just called Four Billionaires; it was called Four Billionaires and a Parking Attendant. So to tell everybody a little bit about that and like how important it was that you had this relationship and paused and got to know the parking attendant and the lessons you had, because I think it's what we should all do with everyone we interact with on a daily basis.
Yes. Talk about loving your neighbor. So when I would drive in the garage at the Carlyle Group, it's at 10th and Pennsylvania Avenue Northwest, and uh, parking garages in buildings are either hot in the summer, cold in the winter, and they're always kind of dim. And no matter what time of year it was, when I drove in there, Salah, this is wonderful man who's an Ethiopian immigrant, he was happy, and he would like spring to attention. Mr. Chris, how are you? How was your weekend? How's your family? Give me your keys. I'll park your car. And when he became an American citizen, I went to his naturalization ceremony with my daughters, and it was a beautiful experience. And everyone should go to one of those if your listeners have not been. Anyway, so I see this man who's, he's definitely on the lower end of the income scale.
Yeah.
But then I would get in the elevator and go up 40 feet to the Carlyle offices, and then literally a beautiful space, temperature controlled, and then billionaire, billionaire, billionaire. I mean, most people never meet any billionaires, but almost every day I would run into three of them and talk with them and work with them. And they're not always happy. And I'm not saying people should be happy all the time, but David Rubenstein has a phrase, and he says, he doesn't know many happy rich people. So what I concluded was that happiness, like love, is a choice. You have to choose to love someone. It's not just a feeling. And happiness, happiness is a choice, meaning you have to be put everything in perspective and be grateful for what you have. And Salah, even though he didn't have a ton of money, was grateful for his family, for his job, for his faith, and it really showed. So when I saw him, it was so obvious that this man had made a choice to be happy, and then it rubbed off on me, and so he earned his way into the book.
That's amazing. One of the lessons I think with John Kasich that you talk about in the book is the kind of difference between talkers and doers, and it kind of gets back a little bit to the beginning of the conversation. But tell us about that distinction. I mean, in politics and business, I'm sure there were lots of people you came across that were kind of talkers, not doers, and how important is that?
Yeah, yeah. John Kasich is an incredible person, leader. I wish he had become president. It didn't work out, but when he worked on Capitol Hill as the chairman of the budget committee, that was the last time the federal budget was balanced. That was in 2001. So it's been 23 years since the federal budget was balanced. And Kasich is very much a doer. He's good at talking, but he's really good at doing too. And at the core of doing, and this is a great lesson in the book called
Mm-hmm.
"Act Like You're Relevant Even When You're Not." And in a nutshell, when Kasich had no power on Capitol Hill, he still put forth bold policy ideas. And everyone told him, don't do that because you just put a target on your back and it will hurt you. And he said, no, I don't want to just complain. I want to tell people what I'm in favor of. Then, when power shifted, he became the chairman of the House Budget Committee. He went to the shelf, pulled off that budget he had created when he
Yeah.
had no power, and said, this is what I believe in, and hit the ground running. Now, so that's what I mean by act like you're relevant even when you're not. So then how does that apply to kind of a regular human or one of your listeners? Well, say you're early in your career and you're in a meeting with a whole bunch of bigwigs at your company, and they say, we need a memo, talking points, some research done, a press release, a speech. I mean, you should throw yourself into the breach, raise your hand, say, I will do it. Here I am. And now that is scary because now you have to deliver, but you went from being on the periphery, having no power, to
Yeah.
now you have power. You're showing that you have initiative. And I think only good things come from that. No one expects you to be perfect, but once you're writing a document, you have what I call the pen. When you have the pen, you have power. And if you wield it correctly, you will actually be able to help make your organization better. So Kasich embodied that.
It's fascinating. So let's stay on politics for a second, especially in light of the commentary on John Kasich, right? You were around the halls of Congress, the White House, private sector. Have you ever seen government and politics so dysfunctional, so challenged, so just difficult and toxic? I mean, I think there's a line in the book where you say, don't let the aisle be a wall, right? And today it just seems like, even within parties, there's walls, coming up and just like no motivation or incentive to collaborate or work together. I mean, the state of our politics, I'd love your thoughts on it. I mean, especially as we're in 2024 now in the presidential year.
Well, the key words that you said were in my time. So I've been in Washington for 37 years. It is clearly, in my perspective, the worst it's been in that time. Now, as David Rubenstein has pointed out, during the Civil War, we killed 600,000 of our fellow citizens. Now, we don't want that just to be the benchmark because that's just way too crazy as a benchmark. So, so yeah, things stink right now. So the line you referenced there, don't let the aisle be a wall. So you have Democrats, you have Republicans, and they have deeply held beliefs. Great. But the bottom line is we live in a divided country. There are people on the left, there are people on the right. Too often each side acts like they run the show, but they really don't. So there are several lessons in the book about reaching across the aisle. There's a really fun lesson from Arthur Levitt working with Phil Gramm. When Arthur was chairman of the SEC, Phil Gramm is the Senate Budget Committee chairman, and Phil, they never met. And Arthur walks in his office, and there's a picture of a Labrador retriever on Phil Gramm's desk. And he says, "Hey, is that your dog?" And he said, "That's my dog." And he said, "I have Labradors too." They spent 20 minutes talking about their dogs before they ever got to the SEC. But that connection, that humanization, changed the nature of their relationship and set it on a path that humanized them so that they said, listen, how bad can someone be if he has a Labrador retriever? And it actually helped them get things done. John Kasich did that too. He worked with people who were way on the left. Ron Dellums, who was a congressman from California, like very, very liberal Democrat. But he found common ground with Kasich on cutting wasteful defense spending. So what people need to do is act like the country matters, not just act, but put the country first.
Yeah.
And then people who don't like each other, try to find something. I mean, if you're a conservative Republican, you don't like AOC from New York. Well, she's a human too. Find something that humanizes her, and she will hopefully do the same with you. And then put the country first. That is what's lacking right now. And I don't see a lot of leadership out there that is kind of bringing people up to their highest and best. And I'm hoping someday. I think Glenn Youngkin could do that someday. And if he runs in 2028, I think he is someone, having worked with him for 18 years, I think he's the kind of person who could do that. I'm sure there are some Democrats out there, Glenn's a Republican, who could build those bridges. But that's what we need. We need people who put the country first, who humanize their opponents, and are actually satisfied with getting 70% of what you want rather than 100% of nothing, which is the crazy part today.
Yeah, so wild. The stakes are just too high. You were around with David in the early years when Carlyle was making all its money. And then you've also been there as he's worked to give away a lot of his money. And you talk a lot in the book about giving smart. And I think, different billionaires in the book do philanthropy in different ways. David seems to have created a kind of unique approach to it. Can you talk about just how hard sometimes it is to give smartly, and also David's unique approach to it, and how you were involved maybe in shaping that?
Yeah. So when you work really hard to make a lot of money, you have to work really hard to give it away wisely. Because say you're a billionaire and you can't just write $25 million checks to small organizations. They just literally can't use the money because they're not scaled properly. So you have to find the right amount for the right organization with the right leaders and the right vision and the right time. I mean, there's so many factors. I mean, for example, if you say you wanted to give $25 million away, you'd have to go find like 10 different organizations and do all this vetting on them to see, can they even use the money, and do their values align with your values? So it takes a huge amount of work. Now, people are probably going, what a problem that is, giving your money away. Well, whether you're giving away $100 or $100 million, you should do it thoughtfully. So David has coined this phrase called patriotic philanthropy, where since he doesn't want just a bunch of fancy paintings in his living room that he can show his friends, or a fancy yacht or something like that, what he's done, he's found things that relate to the history and heritage of America, and has given tons of money to things like that. So as we speak, the Lincoln Memorial and the Jefferson Memorial here in Washington, there are these two major projects of building a visitor center underneath them that David is kind of an anchor gift for each of those to help make those happen. And, of course, he fixed the Washington Monument. He paid for the Panda program. He bought a 1297 Magna Carta, and they built an exhibit around it at the archives. And because he's worried about the lack of historical knowledge among Americans and wants to get people excited about that. Now, he gives a lot of money away to healthcare, academia, the arts. I mean, he's given over $100 million to the Kennedy Center to promote the arts, and that's some patriotic philanthropy in there as well. But so David has this really fun phrase, which I hope your listeners will get a kick out of, about why you should give away money. The first is that you might actually do some good. Handing money to an organization, you might actually help them. All right, so that's a good thing. Second is, when you write the check, it always hurts, but it always feels good right afterwards. And the third is, though you can't buy your way into heaven, why take a chance? So I get a kick out of that. And, David has other criteria. He wants to be able to start a project or complete a project and be in sync with them. And he doesn't want to just write a check. He wants to be involved. So there are lots of factors to consider. But it's really affected my own personal philanthropy. And you don't have to be rich. Philanthropy means the love of humanity. It's not rich people writing checks.
Yeah.
And if you have time, give away your time. If you have thoughts, give away your thoughts. If you have money, give that. If you can give all three, do that too. So it's had a big impact on us. My wife and I target a lot of our giving towards inner city schools, private Christian schools that help kids get a great education. And we've gotten to know the kids that actually receive the money, and it's very heartening to see them grow. And I'm not changing the world. I'm just worrying about my little pond and the people I can affect in my pond.
Well, you're changing their world, and that means something, and it matters. For Billionaires and a Parking Attendant isn't your first book. It really is a blueprint on career and life and these stories. But tell us real quick before I let you go about Find Your Whistle, which was another book that you wrote that I'm halfway through it and just love it and think it's kind of they just tie together, right? And when you wrote these two books, like, talk about that real quick. Like, how do they tie together? What does it mean to find your whistle? And then give folks a little bit of insight on that, because I think that might be for a follow-up coffee talk. But
Sure. So first, I'm a champion whistler, 4-time international whistling champion. It's unusual, but it's been a great part of my life for the past 50 years, literally. And I've won lots of championships, and I've whistled in the Oval Office for the president, been on the Tonight Show, done all sorts of crazy things. Okay, so I write a book about it. But the point of the book is that it's called Find Your Whistle, and that's a metaphor for what is your simple gift. Mine happens to be whistling, but Ken, you have a gift, and I'm sure you have many gifts. Coffee with Ken is one of your gifts, where you are.
I have found my calling.
But you are affecting the lives of people, something that you're proactively doing. Everyone has a gift. I feature 10 people in the book who have simple gifts that have touched my heart. A woman makes a homemade Christmas card every year. It's my favorite card that I get. There's a Catholic priest who started a homeless shelter, and his gift is love. My mother's gift is empathy. And, they're not changing the world, but they are changing their little part of the pond and maybe changing the worlds of those individuals that they affect. So that's what the book is about. But it's told through anecdotes. Again, I'm a storyteller. The 4 Billionaires book is about told through anecdotes, and the whistling book too, where I talk about what was it like to whistle in the Oval Office for the President of the United States. And it is shocking. And I mean, you'll laugh, you'll be dismayed, you'll be like, doesn't this guy have anything better to do? I mean, it's just hilarious, but it's all true. And so I count my blessings that I've had this long career, 37 years in corporate communications, political communications, but then the whistling has been right on top of it the whole time. And Dave Rubenstein calls me up one day and says, "Come to my office." And I go to his office, and there's Ted Leonsis, the owner of the Wizards, and Dave says, "Whistle for Ted." I'm like, okay. I whistle for Ted. And then Ted says, "Wow, that's really cool. You want to whistle the national anthem at a Caps game or a Wizards game?" I said, "Yeah, that'd be great." So I did. You can find it on YouTube.
I love
so it. So I try to get people, and this gets back to that phrase I talked about earlier. Don't deny the world your wonderment. is that if you have something, and think small, don't think big, think small of how can I use this little thing to
Yeah.
touch the lives of other people. Because remember what I said also at the beginning, love God, love your neighbor. And if you're thinking about people other than yourself, you can make, especially collectively, this big impact on our society.
Chris Ullman, always a treat and a pleasure seeing you. I love that we've had this chance to have a public coffee with Ken despite our numerous coffees in person. I'm so grateful for you to be here. Congratulations on the book. Thanks to everyone for tuning in. As always, you can visit coffeewithken.com to catch up on previous episodes. We're also on Google Play, iHeartRadio, and Spotify if you want to listen to us instead of watching us. But watching us is so much more fun. Chris, always great to see you. Thanks again.
Thanks, Ken. Really appreciate it.